Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, at the end of last week, we had released the new long-range seasonal forecast from the European model. And before we get in and see some of that data, I just want to remind you about long-range weather forecasting. This graphic here comes from Columbia University, and what it shows is predictive skill as a function of time. I think we're all very well aware of the fact that skill drops off pretty dramatically with our forecast models as you get away from the initial day, right? And as you get out there towards 2 weeks, we tend to lose a lot of the skill we had at the beginning of the forecast time period. The most challenging time period over which we do forecast is what we call the S2S, or subseasonal to seasonal time scale. In other words, 2 weeks to about 2 months. During that time period, while we can pick up on patterns and give you an idea about anomalous behavior in the atmosphere, we cannot. It's nearly impossible to pick up on high-impact events. I'll give you an example of that in a few moments here. That's what we want to have, but it is probably the greatest challenge in weather forecasting right now is the subseasonal to seasonal time scale. Now, out there at the longer range, or those seasonal outlooks, these are largely based on a few things like ocean temperature patterns, El Nino, La Nina. They're also built on large-scale wind patterns that take a long time to change. And also the initial conditions. In other words, what the model started with will be important to see how it carries that forward. For example, right now, the U.S. has the western half of the country almost completely in drought. And so we have to think about the impacts of that in these long-range forecasts. But let me give you an example about how difficult it is to pick up on those high-impact events. You see, at the beginning of January, we had released a seasonal outlook. They come out on the 5th of every month. And this was the forecast from January for the month of February. And overall, you look at it and you say, okay, I see that it was predicting warmer than average conditions here on the eastern side of Canada, warmer than average in the southwest U.S., even warmer here in the north central plains of the United States. Well, the verification is over here on the right. So you see, we never use these models to give us a deterministic forecast, which means, oh, it's going to be exactly 5 degrees above average for the next, month in this area. We have to look at these more for pattern. And you can see that the model, it actually grabbed the pattern okay. It favored the warmth here, possibly warmer conditions here. It really missed what happened in the northern plains, but largely that was due to one single event, which we've been talking about quite a bit. That was the cold air outbreak from February 4th to about the 20th. Now, that was most of the month, but when you look back on it, we just have to say, what can we actually get from the models? What should we expect them to do? And what I expect them to do is to try to hone in on a pattern, remembering, though, that the predictive skill is low. So here's some of the new data. These were released on Friday. This is the April, May, and June. That's a whole 3-month time period sandwiched together here to give you one map looking at temperature anomalies. And as you can see, it favors broad-scale warmth across much of the U.S. and the Canadian prairie. It centers a lot of that warmth pretty far here, from the central plains of the United States west. And overall, it would continue to appear that we're going to be seeing a mild spring. Now, remember that it's still spring in the mid-latitudes. We'll have fronts. We'll have time periods of cooler weather. These models aren't designed to tell us that. They're designed to tell us the overall pattern moving forward. And in terms of precipitation, I'll summarize what I see here in just a couple of things. First of all, I would say that if we're inside of this area going toward the north and east, planting windows are going to be tightened up a bit by more frequent spring rains. When we get down into the southern plains, the lower Mississippi River Valley, and then back here into, through the high plains all the way up to the northern plains, this is going to be an area that I think is going to be seeing less frequent precipitation. Although, as we go into April, May, and June, we know that this is an area that is targeted with severe weather. So we're not expecting a slowdown in that. We're just looking here at the overall precipitation patterns. And what it's saying here is that we don't have the setup, maybe like we did in 2019, where it was just constant flow over this area and a lot of precipitation. It's a much different look than that. We're favoring broad-scale drier conditions, but there will still be thunderstorms in this area, okay? The west, we do see drier conditions there. Now, as we look out farther here, let's now take the next 3 months and just do June, July, and August. What I see here is that the midsection of the country, from Texas to North Dakota, is favoring warmer conditions. We also see the greatest warmth backing its way up toward the Pacific Northwest. And you also see with me here the warm anomalies here that are in the North Pacific, and that's a clue as to what this pattern is going to hold for us. Meanwhile, much of the southeast, we don't see a strong signal either way. Now, based upon this and the heat we see here, We should also expect that in June, July, August, that the model would naturally, if it was putting in the warmth into this area, it would start to drag in and pull in a much more active southwestern monsoon. Will this materialize? Well, it failed to materialize last year, despite the models predicting it. We do also see that the long-range forecast June, July, August is favoring drier conditions right through the heart of the country up into the Canadian prairie, from Texas all the way to Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, this region and through here. But again, this is all going to depend by midsummer where the ridging sets up. And these models they will not be able to pick up on summer thunderstorm patterns. They're just seeing the broad scale fluctuations in the main flow of the atmosphere and relating that to ocean temperatures. That's what they're capable of doing. You do notice that here, you get from the Mid-South, through the Ohio, Tennessee Valley, all the way down to the south. This whole area, getting up to the eastern Great Lake Basin, is looking wet in the long-range models. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. So something I'm going to be watching very carefully throughout this entire growing season is going to be the position of two ridges, one that is here and one that is here. And there will be, although it's not resolved, there will be a third ridge somewhere across the United States. Now, because of the ocean temperature pattern, the models suggest that they keep building that higher pressure back farther to the west as summer goes on. And depending on the strength of this high over here, so let me draw that a little clearer. This high right here, okay, that will ultimately determine where the active tropical cyclone track is going to be. It's our subtropical high, sometimes called the Bermuda high. It looks right now quite expansive and farther to the west, which would guide more tropical systems when they do begin to form into the eastern part of the United States. Now, remember, these models were all initialized with these data. And so if it starts off dry, it's going to want to carry that forward. It's hard to break what was initially given. And so what we see here is that the latest drought monitor update came out last week. We still had over 60% of the country in drought. And it occupies a large section here of the northern plains and upper Midwest. It also hits down here in the high plains quite hard. And we will have there's more precip on the way for this area. But will it be corrective of this drought? And you can see that it extends into the Four Corners and into California as well. And that's another area we need to talk about here in a few moments. But I'd like to come back to this ocean temperature pattern idea as we kind of wrap up our discussion here at the beginning on long-range weather. You see, we have seen in this area cooler water emerge, and we still have our La Nina, which is fading right here in the central Pacific Ocean. Now, to show you what changes have looked like, I made this map. I took the ocean temperature data, not the anomalies, but the raw ocean temperature data on March 5th, and then I subtracted from that what we had on January 5th. So you'll be able to see where it's getting cooler with time and warmer with time. You see, this is the fading La Nina that I'm talking about. It's not only in the ocean temperatures, but the Southern Oscillation Index is crashing back down towards zero, and it just tells us that that this spring, the La Nina is going to be a lesser impact, allowing things like the MJO, allowing things like the North Pacific jet stream, allowing things like the ocean patterns in the North Atlantic to be a bigger influence on what we're going to be seeing. Now, speaking of those changes, we do notice that there has been some cooler water that has emerged here. But there's a bit of a seasonal trend to this as well. Remember that we would consider January 5th to be like smack dab middle of our cold season, right? But what I want you to think about here is that because the specific heat of water is 5 times greater than land, it takes a while for the water temperatures to respond. So you notice that across the northern hemisphere, there's been cooling over that time period, while there's been warming in the southern hemisphere. And that would be seasonal. We would expect that. But this area right here is the area that I want to watch most carefully. And we just ask ourselves, did the models actually predict that cooling there? And when we say, well, it kind of did. The run that was given to us last February, it found this. It found that cooler wedge. And it even found the behavior of the La Nina quite well here, but not so much next to South America. So you see there's still some inconsistencies here moving forward. Now, June, July, August, I think the most important thing will be to watch the temperatures here and also the warm water that's in place there, how close it gets to the Pacific Northwest, and also what you get here, where we're going to be watching for an active hurricane season once again, given what I showed you with the La Nina, reducing wind shear, the warm ocean temperatures, which you see forecast here, and the fact that the Bermuda high looks to be quite strong, which would help guide more systems into the southeast. These are the big things I'm picking up on now as we start to get into spring, and that's a quick summary of what we're watching out for. Now let's get back to what we've got going on now. Thought I'd show you this map. It shows cumulative downward solar flux, and wherever you see the warmer colors, this is basically where we've seen more sunshine than normal, and the cooler colors is where you've seen less. And you start to see that some places down here in the south and east, and also in the Pacific Northwest, not seeing a lot of sunshine as of late. And I think this map right here kind of summarizes that. Over the last 30 days, some parts here from the Mid-South through the Tennessee and Ohio Valley here have had anywhere between 125 and 200% of normal precip. But then look right here. This region, some places approaching 300% of normal precipitation. We've been dry in the northern plains, drier in the central and high plains, and as we know, very dry here in California and the desert southwest. Now, over last week, we saw a couple of factors here. We had the wetter conditions in the southeast, which we're catching the tail of here in this map, but still quite a bit of heavy rainfall here. We then had the cutoff low. Remember, that just kind of went just like this over the weekend, brought in the rains down here into, down almost far southern California. And we did see some precip move into northern California and coastal Oregon and Washington. Outside of that, very dry last week for much of the rest of the country. Now, I was watching some satellite imagery to kind of get an idea on what this has done. And there's a couple of neat things to pick up here because we have seen some warmer conditions. I was mainly looking for snowpack here. And if we just start here in the northern plains, you can see the warmth that has been in this area pushing into the upper Midwest. Well, look at Minnesota. We're rapidly getting rid of some of this snow in these areas here. Same thing for the lower Michigan and into the Northeast. See it over here? But as I was watching this animation, I did notice something quite interesting. And I want to zoom in on it for you again. It's down in the southeast. And the satellite data showed us some of the fires that were burning in the southeast. It just kind of keeps playing over and over here again. But what I thought was fascinating was, if you notice, the smoke plumes are moving to the south here. But then as you come over into Arkansas and Louisiana, well, they're moving to the west, and they're moving to the north from the south in Arkansas. And it shows you where the surface high pressure cell was sitting, giving us winds like this yesterday. But if you weren't under that smoke, widespread sunshine in an area that hasn't seen much of it lately down here in parts of the southeast. So from there, what we're watching today is the threat for fires is going to be in this area. We have red flag warnings in place, as you can see here in parts of Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. We do have a pretty potent system that's coming into the coast, so we do have winter weather advisories that are out, strong winds, possibly here as you get into the Great Basin, and we'll see the snow that's going to be coming into parts of Montana in a moment. And I'll show you the temperatures too. We have very chilly temperatures today where there's frost and freeze warnings out down here in parts of Georgia and South Carolina. So we've got several pieces moving here. Now, my concern about the fires is echoed in this map. Over this next week, while high pressure sits down here and low pressure systems come racing out of the mountains and toward the Great Lakes, in between will be a strong pressure gradient. And this is accumulated wind gusts between now and Friday evening. And you do see that we'll have a lot of 30s, 40s, 50 mile an hour winds in this area. And before the precip comes in, we do have the risk for fire. That's why the red flag warnings are out for those areas. But what we're watching is this. And this is something that I did not get right last week. Now, we talked about this deep trough coming into the Intermountain West. What I thought it would be is much sharper. What I mean by that is have a lot more curvature to it rather than being more open. It's going to become a much more open wave. And the good news about that is it's going to reduce severe weather threat. And last week I was very concerned about that. But I'll tell you, waiting in the wings is another trough here coming through the Aleutian Islands. And both of these factors will keep the midsection of the country here quite active, but they're going to hit California first. We're going to show you those precip amounts in just a few moments. Here's another thing that I overestimated last week. This is looking at the WPC total accumulated precipitation. I had anticipated more rain for the Central Valley of California. I thought that we could get better than a half inch down here to the valley floor, and it does not appear that the new model runs are going to do that. But as you see, this is an area that had been quite dry, especially as you get over here into parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, this area. And now we're starting to see quite a bit more precipitation. But I want to show you the individual model runs. We'll start with the European first. So over the next week, total accumulated precipitation from the European. You see that from Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, getting into Illinois, this area, clipping the northern part of Arkansas as well, potentially having over 2+ inches of rainfall. All right. From there, southeast dry, parts of the high plains likely missing this, the northern plains, Canadian prairie. We'll talk about snow, but you see some pockets missed here. And again, our issues with California, I'll zoom in on those in just a few moments. Here's the European model solution. I can even go back and forth. This is the European. This is the GFS, European GFS. There are some similarities here that we need to take note on, and it seems as though all the models are targeting this area for the heaviest rainfall. Now, as I mentioned, I know it's a different color bar here, but I haven't finished making my regional maps yet, and you can see that the overestimation is now really showing up here. I had thought more precip would be getting into the San Joaquin and the Sacramento Valley here, but it's going to be more concentrated, where the elevation increases, getting up to the Sierra Nevada. It's precip for California, but it's not as much as I had been anticipating last week. Okay, severe weather. With that broader trough coming in, we're going to watch this area throughout the week, really getting into the day on Wednesday. Remember, what I was saying last week was I thought the trough was going to be sharper. That gives you better upper-level dynamics and better upper-level support for low-pressure development, stronger wind shear, and it's an environment to make more severe weather. But with the wave being more open and slower in progression, it's not going to do that. It doesn't mean we won't have strong storms, but it's not going to be producing the outbreak I was concerned about last week. So let's watch it, okay? High-resolution European model, let's play this out. Here we get into Tuesday. Now into Wednesday, you see the system coming out there. There's another one coming at the end of the week right here on Friday into Saturday. And so we're just going to continue to see systems pulling in on flow doing something like that through the next 10 days. Now, I would like to show you some of the detail here. So let's go back to the beginning and watch this just quickly here, all right? We see that getting through Monday into the day on Tuesday. This will be the first place we're going to watch for some heavier snow, spreading from Montana into southern Saskatchewan and maybe over to Manitoba. We do see a large area of higher pressure sitting over North Carolina, and there'll be strong winds, remember, before the precip gets here. Strong winds, fire threat in the central part of the United States, and also very warm. I'll show you that in a moment. As we go out into Tuesday, now getting into Tuesday evening, getting in now to the overnight hours and Wednesday morning. This is when we get the heavy snows in the Sierra Nevada. This is where we see the rain coming all the way. It'll be in the valley here. But our first of several lows emerges. And it looks like it's going to be right here on the Kansas-Nebraska border. The first system's going to put down, it appears, quite a bit of snow, western Nebraska, western South Dakota, like near Rapid City, and then over into this part of Wyoming. Out ahead of it, rain, and I do believe that will build down to the south here. So this is Wednesday morning, afternoon, and evening. We're going to watch this area for the risk of strong to severe storms, okay? So this is Wednesday evening. Notice, the model currently is trying to pull quite a bit of snow into South Dakota and eventually over to Minnesota. And that's system number 1 that moves out. And it gives us another chance here at some heavier rain as the boundary stalls. So there's going to be a frontal boundary that'll sit right here and connect up with the next low coming out of the Four Corners states at the end of the week. That one is early this week coming through California. Now watch. So the next low starts to emerge right here Friday. Do you see the boundary just lingering? Here it comes on Friday morning, afternoon, getting into the evening hours. So that will be the focal point right into there, that lingering boundary on which the next system forms. Now we're pretty far out in the forecast. This is basically overnight Friday night into Saturday morning. But we're seeing this being the corridor of heaviest precipitation. And now we start to see cold enough air to give us some snow in Colorado. Now remember, March is a snowy month for the Rocky Mountains right in through here. So this is normal for this area. But after the warmth that you've had, it's going to feel like a pretty big shock to the system. So getting into Saturday, look at the snow that the current European model is forecasting in this area, working it through the beginning of the weekend as this next low emerges early next week. So active, very active go of it here. And again, strong to severe storms will build down every time we get one of these lows emerging here in the middle of March. From there, I do want to show you the operational runs on total snowfall, but we're going to look at this for the corridor. So here's the first shot. Here's the second shot as you see going through here, and just take a look at some of the snowfall totals back in the Sierra Nevada. Possibly a couple of feet here at highest elevations, both in the Klamath Mountains and the Sierra Nevada. From here, why don't we just look at the GFS? It's a similar picture, right? So you see first, there's the second, and we can see the snow back in the Sierra Nevada. But to get an idea on the amounts, it's early. So let's just take a look at the probability of getting at least 3 inches. And we see those same corridors identified here by the European ensemble as to where we're expecting the heavier snows to possibly be. All right. From there, as we go out longer term, remember we were watching last Monday for changes. I said if we go over cool in the middle of March, these are the things that are going to have to happen, and they're now taking shape. I put the teleconnections over there on the left, but what we start to see here is that a broader trough begins to kind of establish itself right here over the Hudson Bay. And at that time period, it will allow cooler shots to just come through the eastern half of the United States. So what does that look like in terms of precip? Well, it's going to keep this area overactive. Now, we had originally thought that once we got past mid-March, that we would see some relief here along, well, from Georgia all the way up to Virginia in terms of precip. But with the shift in the trough coming back into the Hudson Bay, we now start to see better chances at precip into week 2. There, stretching from, again, parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley, Ohio River Valley, into the mid-Atlantic. We're going to be seeing drier conditions favored here, but like I said, we'll still see the thunderstorm activity in this area as the waves do eject into this region. That's precip. Temperatures. Early this morning when I was recording, we'd already seen over in the Carolinas getting down, even into Georgia, temperatures dropping down there below freezing. This is the area we were watching for that. Mild conditions, as you see here in the midsection of the country, but very cold in the northeast. Where are these temperatures going today? Well, let's just watch the next 7 days here in terms of high temperatures. We're going to finally see that colder air exit east, and look at the broad scale warmth we've got here in the midsection of the country. Compared to normal, we're about almost 30 degrees above average. Going from Monday here into the day on Tuesday, there's Tuesday's look. In fact, this area here in Minnesota might be over 40 degrees warmer than normal, according to the National Digital Forecast Database. Tuesday into Wednesday. Now remember, this is when the activity really starts to kick up. You can see the boundary. There's where the front will be. And we go from there into Thursday and into Friday. You can almost just find right here where that lingering boundary sits. Now, the temperatures we'll see here in the high plains. This is going to be something to watch into the weekend as the snow begins to show up there. Do we have a situation where it gets warm enough to melt some of it off during the day? That's what we're seeing in the models, but we go into a cooler next weekend compared to what we've seen across a broad sector of the U.S. Now, from here moving forward, day 5 through 10 is over there on the left. And you're going to notice the model's got a big bullseye of cold air here. And that's because they're also putting down snow in that area. So this is just a feedback in the model that if it's got snow on the ground, it's going to keep it cool, which means watching how rapidly the snow melts will be critical to knowing if this 5 to 10 day time period is correctly forecast there in that part of the plains. Warmer along the East Coast. As we get out there longer term, though, day 10 through 15, we continue to see that bias. See it there? But the pattern, I think, brings us through a cooler time period mid-month. But then the longer range models, this was just released on Friday. It wants to just bring more warmth back in as we get out toward the end of the month, which means these shots at cooler air are just that. They seem to be shots at cooler air. The precipitation patterns, as we stated, I think to the east of that little half circle I drew, that's where our tighter planting windows are going to be moving forward. Okay, let's wrap it up here. And we'll watch this all week because there's plenty to watch. I appreciate your attention to get your week started here. Have a good week. Thanks.